You can kick off, Mark. Tasnim, whenever you feel like.
Okay. Well, shall we wait? It's 2 o'clock. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of ETIP Hydropower, I welcome you to our webinar presenting the 3 white papers from the working group Hydropower and Biodiversity. My name is Tasnim Siegfried Jarweit from EREF, the European Renewable Energy Federation, and we are one of the project partners of ETIP Hydropower. So the topic, hydropower and biodiversity in partnership. Hydropower plays a crucial role in providing renewable energy and reducing carbon emissions. Yet it must coexist in harmony with the natural ecosystems. A partnership approach between the energy and the environment sectors ensures that clean power production goes hand in hand with biodiversity protection. So at the beginning, some housekeeping remarks. Microphones and cameras are switched off. And after each white paper presentation, and this is very important, we will have a direct Q&A session. And for this session, you can use the Q&A button in Teams, or you can raise your hand and we will grant you the microphone or video. The chat can also be used for sharing information. The agenda. It's just, we'll give you a very brief introduction on ETIP Hydropower and the working group number 2, which is not the focus right now. The focus is on the presentation of the white papers from Biodiversity. The first one is enabling fish mobility at hydropower plants. The second one is environmental flow and hydropeaking. And the third one will be sediment dynamics. The objectives of ETIP Hydropower, I think I'll skip. I think everybody knows ETIP Hydropower in the meantime. With regard to the structure, I might go through to give you a better idea of the context of the white papers. So we have a secretariat, which is probably handled by the project team of ETIP Hydropower, and the General Assembly, which really is in place and open to everybody of the European hydropower community. And I think many of you are already part of this. The governing board, which has been elected, is the strategic decision-making body of ETIP Hydropower. It has 26 members, and it's very important to say that they are elected from all industry sectors. The scientific advisory board just ensures that research consistency in the EU hydropower sector. The governing board singled out 4 key topics for the hydropower industry right now. And out of these 4 topics, working groups have been created. And we are just focusing on the working group number 2, which is hydropower and biodiversity. And all white papers and videos have been or will be published still in 2025. So the working group number 2 is hydropower and biodiversity. We as EREF are the working group coordinator, and the chair is Christoph Hauer from BOKU Austria. And Christoph, maybe you will give a short introduction to the working group.
Yeah, thanks, Tasnim. So a very warm welcome also from my side. It was a pleasure for me to coordinate this working group together with my co-chairs, which are listed here on this slide, but also with Jeff Tutten and Klaus Jorde, who were leading the group Fish Mobility and E-Flows, so presenting later today. So it was a very nice atmosphere we had over several rounds of workshops, most of them online. And the results, like it was introduced, will be presented today. These are these white papers. But later, we are looking for implementing this kind of research and development needs also in future strategies for hydropower. But not being too long on this place, I want to stop here and hand over to Tasnim again, and then we'll start with this presentation. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Christoph. So we'll start with the first presentation from Jeff. And Jeff, please introduce yourself, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Tasneem. My name is Jeffrey Tutton. I'm an associate professor at Tallinn University of Technology in Estonia, a country which has remarkably little hydropower. I did my master's and PhD in Germany and then worked for several years as an engineering consultant for various hydropower companies. And then now run a research group where we specialize in building monitoring technologies. Before I begin my presentation today, I just want to thank all of the members of our working group who were really committed to in this very long and challenging process to put together the white paper. So I'm just presenting on behalf of the hard work of our group members. So let us begin with hydropower and biodiversity. As we well know, hydropower represents humanity's first achievement in creating renewable electrical energy. And that's exciting potential. And now we understand even more that this achievement comes with a lot of responsibilities. So enabling fish mobility, it's not simply a technical challenge. It has now also become a moral as well as an ecological imperative. By addressing these issues, we demonstrate that progress and preservation can coexist together. And today I'm going to help explore some practical solutions and give you some success stories showcasing that we can actually put hydropower in the forefront and also achieve some of our clean energy and biodiversity goals. One of the most important annual, whoops, the slides are changing here automatically.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
One of the most important annual reports that comes out is from the World Economic Forum. And the Global Risks Report reminds us here, if we look at these lists of long-term challenges, that biodiversity loss is among the most pressing challenges of our time. It's not a distant concern. Biodiversity loss affects food security, it affects water quality, and indeed, biodiversity loss has a significant impact on the resilience of entire ecosystems. So, although this seems daunting, there's a lot of green items on that list. It also highlights an opportunity. Every action that we take as a community to restore connectivity, especially in rivers, contributes to reversing these trends. Hydropower operators can become champions of ecological health, proving that energy production and biodiversity protection are not mutually exclusive, but rather mutually reinforcing. As a successful example, Austria has Life Rivers project on the River Muir, which has shown very strongly that restoring river connectivity and improving habitats has both boosted local tourism and also demonstrated that energy and ecology can work hand in hand. Next slide. Unfortunately, since 1970, we have lost 76% of migratory freshwater fish populations. If this were a stock market, we would certainly call it a crash. A 76% decline is alarming, and it is indeed a call to action. These species are key indicators of river health, and their recovery signals broader ecological problems with resilience. By investing in fish passage and fish mobility solutions, we're not only helping fish, we're also safeguarding the integrity of entire freshwater ecosystems. The hopeful message here is that targeted interventions can work. Where communities and industries collaborate, fish populations can rebound and rivers can regain their vitality. This is a story of renewal waiting to be written. On the Dordogne River in France, over a long period of time, installing a series of both nature-like fishways helped restore populations of both European eel and shad, species that have been declining for decades. We can turn this story into a comeback story. Next slide. The WWF's emergency recovery plan emphasizes restoring natural flow and connectivity. These goals are certainly ambitious, but they are achievable with coordinated and sustained effort. Each of these recommendations reflects the hard lessons learned from decades upon decades of river management, and implementing them will create lasting benefits for biodiversity and human well-being. Rather than viewing these 6 measures as burdens, we can see them as investments in our sustainable future. When rivers flow freely, they support fisheries, tourism, and our cultural heritage. These are benefits that extend far beyond simple ecological metrics. And as an example, Portugal's efforts on the Mondego River show that removing obsolete barriers has substantially revived local fisheries and reduced flood risks. So there are additional win-win opportunities for both ecology and human health and safety. Next slide. Europe stands currently at the forefront of integrating ecological considerations into hydropower planning in the long term and in the short term. As we know, balancing energy and ecology is not an easy compromise. In the European context, it is actually a strategy for resilience. Existing regulatory frameworks provide clear guidance, and site-specific experience and solutions ensure that interventions respect local conditions and their ecological needs. By embracing innovation and collaboration, Europe can demonstrate conclusively that renewable energy development strengthens rather than weakens environmental stewardship. This is a model that can inspire global best practices and also create new export markets for European business. Next slide. I can't have a slide about the EU without legislation. Legislation such as the Water Framework Directive and the Habitats Directive, they reflect a shared commitment to ecological health. The policies are not just formalities. They're instruments of our societal evolution. Targets like restoring 25,000 kilometers of free-flowing conditions by 2030 are very bold, but they also send strong positive signals of hope and determination. Achieving these goals will require creativity, investment, and a whole lot of cooperation among sectors. The reward at the end of this is that Europe will have a Europe where rivers sustain life and livelihoods for generations to come. An inspiring example is Germany's Blue Belt plan to reopen more than 4,000 kilometers of rivers by removing small weirs shows that big progress often starts with the smallest of steps. Next slide. Why do we need fish passage at hydropower plants? Fish passage is absolutely essential because our rivers are the lifelines for dozens and dozens of species. Disrupting fish migration patterns undermines ecosystem stability and the underlying food webs. By restoring connectivity, we strengthen resilience against climate as well as human pressures. This is not just about fish, and I can't stress this enough. It's not just about fish. It's about maintaining an ecological balance that supports agriculture, drinking water, recreation, cultural heritage, among other things. Every single successful passage solution is a step towards healthier rivers and stronger communities. Next slide. Existing solutions, there are many. In this figure, I just want to highlight that the solutions have to be focused on both upstream and downstream connectivity. So fish need to migrate both up and downstream. And solutions such as bypass channels and fish lifts, these demonstrate clearly that engineering can indeed serve ecology. These tools are always evolving, becoming more efficient, and in most cases also more cost-effective. Each one of these projects tells us something new about fish species behavior, as well as the hydraulic design and the species-specific needs. The hopeful perspective here is that we are not starting from scratch every time we carry out a fish migration project. We do indeed have proven methods that can be scaled and refined, recalibrated, and if needed, reapplied. What's key is that we have good collaboration between scientists, engineers, and hydropower operators to ensure continuous improvement. That means that the designs from yesterday, from 10 years ago, are not the state of the art, and that we should open ourselves to things like applying adaptive management to allow regulators to update the requirements and monitoring needs based on the best available information. And this will help to continuously optimize and improve fish mobility and avoid repeating past mistakes. Next slide. So for those folks who are not so familiar with fishways, I just wanted to provide a very simple juxtaposition of figures. There are many, many types of fishways available. Fishway design is a field of engineering in its own right at this stage. And on the two opposing ends, or the two different ends, we have on the left side, we have nature-like fishways, which offer complementary approaches for upstream and in some cases downstream passage. And nature-like designs can be a very large win for local ecosystems, for example, by providing, in addition to passage, spawning grounds. And technical solutions, what you see here on the right side is a classical vertical slot fishway. These technical solutions tend to maximize efficiency and are especially suitable for constrained spaces. And I want to highlight that both approaches and all the approaches in between, these really reflect the hard work, ingenuity, and respect for the underlying ecological and hydrological processes. And by combining and custom tailoring these different types of fishways at our sites, we allow ourselves to provide new and improved, highly adaptive solutions to enable up and downstream fish migration. Next slide. Now, in some cases, when we're thinking about upstream migration, there are only very specific options available. This is an excellent example here on the left from a fish lift in Rünsrau, Austria, where due to space and local geographical constraints, it was not feasible or possible to build a large-scale fishway to facilitate upstream fish migration. And on the left here, we also have a trap and transport system, which can be used to carry fish over multiple consecutive barriers in a fairly efficient way and can be suitable for many, especially for large body migratory fish, things like salmonids. So the hopeful message here is that these kinds of bespoke solutions can also be expanded and added to our migration toolkit, allowing us to respond effectively to site-specific constraints without sacrificing our larger long-term ecological goals. And each alternative solution here represents a commitment to problem solving and a refusal to accept barriers simply as being permanent obstacles to upstream migration. Next slide. Conventional downstream migration methods are typically what you see here on the left, physical barriers where the fish are blocked, usually with some kind of grate or screen. And these remain vital components of fish protection. The measures substantially reduce turbine mortality, and in many cases are effective means to guide fish towards safer routes. Continuous refinement, similar to upstream migration methods, continuous refinement ensures that these methods remain effective and adaptable. The progress we've made in this area demonstrates clearly that even established technologies can continuously evolve to meet new challenges, and that we can consistently improve and refine barriers and bypass systems to include smaller bodied fish, for example, and also a wider range of species. Next slide. Newer, and I would argue as a civil engineer, more exciting means of downstream passage also include letting the fish pass through the turbines. So emerging technologies such as adjustable blade runners and restoration hydropower turbines really represent a new era of eco-hydraulic engineering. These innovations aim to harmonize both energy production with species protection, reducing impacts on fish passing through turbines with the most modest of changes in efficiency. So I'm especially excited by the promise of these methods because they are scalable. We can implement these for small hydropower, medium, and large hydropower in many cases. And they also have the potential to transform and expand the products that European manufacturers can deliver both here in Europe and also abroad. So by investing further in research and development of new, less damaging turbine types, I think we can accelerate the transition to sustainable hydropower. Next slide. Evaluating the best practices across all methods of improving fish mobility at hydropower plants was a substantial challenge. So after a lot of thinking and collecting suggestions and evidence, we came up with really basically three. The first is that it's necessary to conduct rigorous comparative studies to optimize your on-site needs. In almost nearly every country in Europe, the biological criteria and long-term monitoring data are available for sites similar or nearly identical to yours. The question is, can you get access to this data? Are comparative data available to you? And in most cases, the answer is no. And this also came out to be one of the largest gaps that we identified, that although the hydropower community is omnipresent across Europe, a lot of good information is difficult to share and to find to improve and optimize on-site configurations for improved designs. So this is also a major gap. The second best practice that we found was that the biological and hydraulic performance criteria should, to the largest extent possible, be standardized and also be made available. There's a tremendous amount of scientific research done on this topic, and there are also excellent studies done by hydropower operators. And I think that it's important that these data are, to a certain extent, standardized and shared across the European community, at least, so that these biological and hydraulic performance criteria are clearly defined and implemented in as many new projects as possible. And finally, the last best practice is to really implement long-term monitoring and reporting. Although for some small hydropower plants, long-term monitoring and reporting may not be as critical, we found that there are major gaps in monitoring and reporting across European countries, and we think that it would be certainly beneficial if long-term monitoring and reporting became a standard feature at hydropower plants of medium or large sizes, where the fish migration events are most likely to affect the largest range of species. Next slide. So to advance fish mobility at hydropower facilities, we really need to focus on a few key gaps. We need to develop and enable the application of new technologies for up and downstream passage. So I would like to say, give technology a fighting chance. As I pointed out earlier, although there are excellent data collected both by academic and also operator research programs, there is a tremendous amount of field data which is simply missing for many European fish species, especially small body fish that are not salmonids or European eel. Another gap that we've identified is that the monitoring methods tend to vary widely across Europe, especially considering downstream passage. So we believe that additional effort should be put into standardizing monitoring methods with a focus on downstream passage. And last but not least, all of the efforts that we put in to allow fish to migrate freely both up and downstream around necessary and important barriers to support our electrical infrastructure in Europe means that we need to focus on fish populations. And there's still a tremendous amount of work to do linking individual site-specific modifications to estimated improvements on fish populations. So there should also be a substantial amount of time and effort put into research and grounded research, field research on how to better estimate fish populations. Next slide. Next slide.
Tasneem, you're
It's
muted.
Ah, sorry, it's changed.
It's in the key takeaways. Jeffrey.
Ah, sorry. My slides are out of sync here on my local machine. Okay, yeah. So the key takeaways: Europeans' leadership in hydropower positions itself to set global benchmarks for ecological integration. Closing these innovation gaps, installing new and improved turbines designs which are less damaging to fish, and clearly articulating a strategic vision will certainly help to ensure that European hydropower remains clean, reliable, and lowers its impact on freshwater biodiversity. And I would like to conclude with one simple, hopeful thought. Hydropower, energy technology, and ecosystem improvement can advance together. And I think that if we team technology with improved designs and put a little more time and effort into Europe's already growing role and leadership in hydropower, I think that we can actually create a new generation of resilient and sustainable European electricity. And I think we can do that in the next 2 decades or less. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Okay.
Jeff.
Now we have a Q&A session. And I think, Jeff, it is very important that you pointed out that a free-flowing river and the hydropower plants are not a contradiction. And so that's, I think I will hand over to Araya for
Yes, so thank you, Tasneem. So now it's time for questions. So anyone who wants to raise a question, you can either write them down in the Q&A or you can raise your hand and I will give you access to the microphone. So we have time for 1 or 2 questions, depending on how long they are. So don't be shy. Okay, we have 1 question. Any thoughts on downstream migration? Okay. Any thoughts on downstream migration in the case of large reservoirs? That's a question from Klaus.
Yeah, so I think that for salmonids and eel, I think that trap and transport is probably the method that is most utilized in Europe. Of course, for a lot of those reservoirs, the question is my downstream migration actually applicable for some of these larger man-made reservoirs?
Thank you, Jeffrey. I will give now the microphone access to Arun Kumar. So feel free to speak now. You have access to the microphone.
Yes, for the low head applications like 5 to 10 meter, 15 meter, 20 meter, migration structures are quite successful. But when the large head dams are there, like say 50 meter, 100 meters, or even 20, 25 meters, the problem of the efficacy of these migration structures is always in question. Though there are lifts available somewhere, but then very cumbersome exercise. So that kind of situation is there, and we need to look at some solutions. So could I ask you that what kind of things you are thinking of?
So the majority of hydropower dams in Europe are definitely not in the high head range. So I think most of the question I would say is, what can we do in the near future to make the largest impact? And so I don't think we need to focus on solutions for the very, very few, very large head dams we have. I think we can look at where biodiversity loss is the largest, prioritize those barriers, and look at providing passage solutions at those specific sites first and foremost. So I wouldn't focus on the head of a specific site as the main criteria for action. I would rather focus on creating um, a plan based on where we can improve freshwater biodiversity the most by doing something in the least amount of time. Because that's, for me, I think that's the number one goal, is to actually reduce the effect of hydro operations on biodiversity.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Okay, so we have some questions, but we need to move forward. So I suggest maybe Jeff, you can reply to the questions. If you write them in the Q&A box, then Jeff can reply them by text, and we can follow with the next presentation, so we don't run out of time. Thank you so much. I give you the floor, Tasneem, or Klaus, maybe directly.
Okay,
Hello.
Klaus. So, Klaus, please introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you, Tasneem. Good afternoon. My name is Klaus Jorde. I'm a civil engineer. I've been working on environmental flows for decades in various positions. And on this panel here, I'm representing the IEA Technology Collaboration Program on hydropower. And basically, I'm an independent consultant working from Austria. So I also would like to thank the team that was working with me on this topic on environmental flows. And let's move to the first slide, please. We start with a definition, what are environmental flows? And you will find all kinds of definitions depending where you're looking for. I used the one from Angela Arthington, and she says environmental flows describe the quantity, timing, and quality of freshwater flows and levels necessary to sustain aquatic ecosystems and so on, but also to restore socially valued benefits, and which are also relevant not only for the ecosystems, but also for services, economy, sustainable livelihoods. So there's two things which we can take out of that. First, environmental flow is not just one number, but it's the quantity, it's the timing, it's the quality, it's the seasonality, it's all kinds of components of the flow. And the other one, it's not only for the environment, but it's also for the need of people. So that's the general definition of what environmental flows are about. The next slide, please. Here is just a few examples of few classical examples. We had quite a bit of discussion when we were working on this, if we wanted to include hydropeaking aspects and general regime changes. And we came to the conclusion that environmental flow is sort of covering or addressing all of those, because they are all related to regime changes as compared to the natural hydrological regime. On the left side, you see a classical diversion type hydropower plant where there's very little water downstream of the dam because all the water is in the diversion canal or pipe or penstock. Then you see a large reservoir which is releasing water downstream depending on the operation of the hydropower plant. So this could be a complete change of the hydrological regime depending on how large the reservoir is. And the right side then finally is a river that's affected by a regime change, a seasonal regime change, and hydropeaking, which is sort of overlaying each other. So these are the situations that are relevant for environmental flows, not only the ones that are typical diversion type hydropower plants. Next slide, please. So why are environmental flows important? Well, Jeff already mentioned the situation of the biodiversity of freshwater fish species. They are on a dramatic decline. So e-flows are relevant because they maintain freshwater habitats, their composition, characteristics, dynamics, and which are relevant for all biological communities. Many species rely on a seasonal flow variation because they are adjusted with all their life cycle to a certain flow regime, for example, an alpine snowmelt driven regime or something, or depending on which georegion we are talking about. There are always specific seasonal regimes. Environmental flows are also important for the connectivity, and here this relates to fish migration and also to sediment transport, the longitudinal connectivity, but also the lateral connectivity, the access into tributaries, into the floodplain. E-flows are also important for the riparian vegetation. Riparian vegetation depends on certain water levels and certain processes that are driven by the flow of water in the floodplains. And finally, e-flows are also relevant for the temperature regime and strengthen the resilience of rivers against climate change impact. So there are a lot of different reasons why environmental flows are very relevant for river ecosystems. Next slide, please. Here we have some of the examples where e-flows are relevant. As I already mentioned, there are different situations where this is relevant. We see here the first one on the left side, that little picture, that's basically a very small reservoir or no reservoir, a run-of river operation, and we have downstream of that dam, we have a dewatered reach, which is losing most of the water because it's running in the penstock or the canals. So here we have a classical environmental flow situation. In the middle picture, we have a larger reservoir and a hydropower plant which is operating under a intermittent regime, a hydropeaking, a storage hydropower plant. So we have a dewatered reach, and downstream of the tail race outlet, we have a reach which is impacted by hydropeaking. So we have totally different hydrologic regimes in those two sections, and both are heavily impacted. And then finally, on the right side, we see a very large reservoir and a powerhouse directly at the bottom of the dam. And downstream of that, we have regime changes if it's a large reservoir, and we might have hydropeaking depending on how the hydropower plant is operated. And it's not only hydropower operation, but there's also water abstractions for irrigation or other types of anthropogenic uses, which becomes more and more relevant in the southern part of Europe. Next slide, please. Now, why are environmental flows important for hydropower? Well, obviously, if the water cannot run through the turbines, it causes economic losses for the hydropower plant. The energy generation is reduced. There is also a loss of dispatchable renewable energy in the grid. And now keep in mind that dispatchable renewable energy, that's the most valuable source of electricity that we have. It's carbon-free or almost carbon-free, and it's dispatchable, and hydropower is the only source of such energy. And then environmental flow releases can cause operational limitations, especially if hydropower plants operate only with 1 or 2 Francis turbines. It may happen that there is not enough water to even operate 1 turbine. So that can have severe operational impacts on the hydropower plant. So obviously, because of that, hydropower operators, they are often advocating for a reduction of environmental flows. And it's really necessary to find sound compromises. Next slide, please. How are environmental flows determined? there are various methods. They reach, if we look at the right side at the picture, they reach from very simple hydrological rating methods, which this is just a percentage of the natural flow. So it could be like 10% of the mean annual flow or something. That's something you can determine within a few minutes sitting on your desk. You don't even have to go to the river. Very simple to determine, but they have very little ecological relevance. But those methods have been widely applied. Then the next one is our hydraulic rating methods. Hydraulic rating means that you're looking at hydraulic parameters such as the wetted area or the water depth or something like that, and how this is changing as the flow is increasing. And certain limits are then implemented regarding hydraulic parameters such as flow velocities or water depths. That already has a bit of an ecological relevance. It's getting better, but also needs much more effort and much more modeling tools and much more data when we come to habitat modeling. Habitat modeling means that a hydrodynamic model is used to represent the physical part of the riverbed, and this is linked with species preferences. That means that it's linked with what the species prefer or need for their habitats. So we are combining water depths that we model in the riverbed with water depths that, for example, a trout prefers during a certain life stage, for example, for spawning or for resting or whatever. And this way we can actually calculate, we can quantify, and we can qualify the available habitat that is available for a species or for a life stage of a species or so on. And then finally, we have integrative methods. These methods integrate all the other ones that we have already mentioned, and they put it all together. So they are not excluding the other ones, but they are integrating the other ones. They are also called holistic methods. Basically, these are methods that look at all the different parameters that influence not only the river ecosystem, but also the livelihoods of the people along the riverbed, and that's all taken together. And then based on that, environmental flows regulations can be derived. The scope generally has to be catchment-wide. It has to be clear what role a river reach that is under investigation is playing within the catchment. Like, is this a critical reproduction reach for an endangered species, for example? And also we have to look at other impacts on the ecosystem to evaluate how severe the impact on this specific reach is, for which we determine an e-flow. So catchment-wide assessment is very important, also cumulative, because hydropower acts together with other anthropogenic influences on river systems. And we need to come more to an adaptive management approach, which so far is hardly ever happening. An e-flow regulation is determined and then it's implemented, and there is no time and money to go back and see what is happening afterwards. Next slide, please. So that's what we have today. If we look at the practice in Europe, we see that all over Europe, we are using different approaches. Some countries have no regulations at all. For some countries, we have no data. This is from a publication in 2021. Some countries rely on hydrological methods. Some countries using habitat methods, and a few are generally implementing holistic approaches. So we have differences from country to country. There's nothing which is implemented across Europe. We have differences even sometimes within countries from one province to the other. We see that we have more advanced methods in countries that have a long hydropower tradition, and the opposite with countries that have little hydropower or less experience. And There's, of course, a divergence between the expectations from the Water Framework Directive and the regulatory reality when such very simple methods are implemented. Next slide, please. So in order to move away from this high variability of methods that are implemented in Europe, we should come to similar to a situation where we use a similar set of methodologies. Environmental flows are critical for both river ecosystem and hydropower operators, and also for renewable energy generation in general. So we really need well-balanced methods. Right now, we have a large variety of methods, and some of them have very little ecological relevance. Others have more. We need to agree, or everybody should agree, that we only should release as much water as is really needed for the protection of the ecosystem. Because there is a societal interest to produce as much energy from hydropower as possible, because it's dispatchable, in the case of storage hydropower plant, renewable energy. This balance between releasing enough water but not too much can only be achieved with the advanced methods. That's not possible with the simple ones. Holistic approaches generally should be supported. We need to establish we need to establish and preserve functional habitats on all trophic levels, and that can be achieved by the use of these holistic approaches. And then finally, we need biological databases that are based on long-term monitoring programs, because we do not have enough information on what actually happens once an environmental flow regulation is in place and implemented over time. There needs to be more research into that. And the final slide, please. So the research need is summarized in one sentence. Research is needed to establish a suite of appropriate methods to determine e-flows to be implemented in specific situations in a cumulative catchment-wide assessment. So there's not one method, but there should be a suite of appropriate methods depending on the specific situation. But that should be sort of implemented uniformly across Europe. The scope must be on ecologically relevant methodologies. It needs to be a cumulative and catchment-wide approach. We need to balance ecosystem protection and electricity generation. There must be simplified solutions for very small hydropower plants, and we must come to a general strategy of using adaptive management by monitoring and adaptation once the methods are implemented or once the e-flows are implemented, and we need to develop better databases for what is happening under certain e-flow regimes. And I think that was the final slide. Okay.
Yes.
Thank
Okay.
you very
Then
much.
we can have Q&A. Araya, do you have any questions?
Yeah. So there is one question from Aaron, from Professor Aaron. For the river passing through many countries, using different methods for e-flow in the absence of a common methodology is detrimental for the purpose of e-flow. Use suggestion.
Yes,
I don't know.
countries have to collaborate, and they have to do a catchment-wide analysis and a cumulative assessment. So countries have to collaborate. As with all with all hydrological issues, countries should be collaborating, because these are, all the cross-border issues. If the upstream country is doing something that is not good for the downstream country, so this is quite a common situation, and it also applies to environmental flows.
Thank you, Klaus.
I also see a question from Sweden, and I assume you are right. There was just nothing in the publication, but definitely Sweden implements some environmental flows. So yes, it must. There was no information in that publication where this is from.
Okay, any other questions from the public? I don't see any hands raised or questions in the Q&A part. Okay, now Benjamin has a question. Should we expect new e-flow values due to climate change?
Possibly. I mean, climate change is affecting hydrological regimes. It is increasing the temperature issue. We already see that fish populations are shifting their regional distribution because waters are getting warmer. So possibly, yes. I mean, there would be an ecological argument to ask for that it has to be considered. Of course, on the other side, hydropower operators, they do not want that. Hydropower operators do not something which is changing, which is up for change in the near future. They want to have a regulation and operate with that, and not have the risk of ever increasing requirements or something like that. So again, this has to be well balanced.
Thank you, Klaus. Any other question? We have room for one more question. I see Charlene Monaco is asking, are there any countries with good biological databases to be used as an example for others?
I think I mean there are quite good databases in the Pacific Northwest on the salmon, in the US and Canada, and I think the best databases I'm aware of is in Europe is data from EDF in France. I know that in some cases they have been monitoring rivers for many years with the same methodology. So the data are really consistent and over long periods of time. But
Okay.
maybe Christoph knows more about that.
Of course, Christoph, if you want to jump in to respond.
Yes, so Europe for sure have very good database also in the north. So colleagues in Norway, they really are monitoring also this returning of the wild Atlantic salmon on a regular basis, in addition to assessments of environmental impacts of hydropower plants. So according to the region in Europe, with for sure adapted methods, but in principle, the database is in many countries for more than 1 decade or even 2 decades if continuous repeated sampling. So meaning that we have the opportunity for detecting these kind of impacts of climate change, and then later coming with some suggestions about adaptations of one of these aspects of hydropower, like it was discussed with e-flows, for example.
Thank you, Christoph. I think we should move to the next presentation.
Okay. Yeah, Christoph. So
Yeah, that's
it's
me.
still with you.
It's me. Yeah, so I'm Christoph Hauer from Boca University, and I was the former head of the Christian Doppler Laboratory for Sediment Research and Management. And the topic I'm talking today is about sediment dynamics. And many things I will talk about this, which I was discussing with my colleagues working in this kind of working group. So a big thanks to all of them supporting this white paper. But many aspects were coming out of this research period from 2017 to 2024. And next year, we'll have a new opportunity with the EIT Water. So we were announced last week that we were the winning bid, and there will be this kind of co-location center installed in Vienna. With the topic we're looking on is about the water food energy nexus. So energy and water, so meaning still the hydropower business, will be a part of the further work we are doing here. And I'm also the head of the eco-hydraulics research group at Boca University. So since 20 years, I'm working also in the same field like Klaus was saying, and also Jeff, and this linking between hydropower, abiotic processes, and what the biodiversity response is according to this kind of variabilities. So next slide, please. So why sediments are important? So the sediments are the key components of river in ecosystems and therefore the aquatic ecosystems. I always say, so river sediments and the sediment dynamics is the backbone of a healthy river system or an unhealthy one. So both the discharge and the sediment supply are forming the rivers if they have a certain lateral width where they can establish these natural processes, but it's essential that we consider these dynamic processes which belong to the sediments. So also in some of the regulatories, we have a very static point of view on the river's ecosystems. So we are mapping habitats. We are also modeling a kind of variable habitats according to different discharges. But what we have to address is like what Klaus was saying, one of his last slides, this holistic approach, including this kind of sediment dynamics, also in residual flow stretches to a certain extent where you will have a renewing of the habitats in a certain way. So meaning that sediment and sediment dynamics maintain the connectivity and the quality of the ecosystem and connecting to the river and the local species and to preserve the natural geomorphological balance of the river required for the dynamic equilibrium. And this is what we stated out of this group and the functional habitats. Because it will not be very easy in future to establish this kind of historical channel patterns in our alpine valleys or other floodplain areas because the societal development and also the pressure on the floodplains and on the valley systems is very high. So meaning that we have, just taking one example of Austria, in river, big alpine river, we have on the one hand side the railway close to the banks. On the other side, we have the highway close to the riverbank. So meaning from this perspective, it's not possible to establish anymore these kind of historical channel patterns. But we say, and this is also what we agree in science to a large extent, it's important that we establish the functional habitats. So those habitats where, in our cases, in the alpine rivers, we have the salmonid species, where the salmonid species has developed over the last 8 to 10,000 years their needs, like for reproduction, for rearing, and for adult ones. And these functional habitats should be established in a sustainable way. So meaning that the river is maintaining these habitats on its own. And this includes, we need the kind of sediment dynamics and the processes behind as a very crucial boundary condition to address. So as it is stated as the third point here, for the maintenance, the downstream environment, the stabilization also of the downstream river sections, coastline and deltas. And so meaning this has also this kind of societal importance because when rivers are incising, we have the risk that the bank failures, we have the risk that the groundwater level is decreasing. We have then the risk when it comes, for example, in Vienna, east of Vienna, with our national floodplain, forest floodplain national park, that we have not this kind of inundation process anymore like it needed. And then going further downstream, for example, Romania is losing land every year by coastal erosion because sediments are not coming anymore to those areas and the sea is taking the sand, the sea is taking the coastline and not bringing the sand. So meaning the rivers are the important transport routes of the sediments also to the coastline and the deltas. So this is a very important topic also for this kind of tourism on the European scale. So it is addressed also in Brussels, and it has been addressed in our activities and reporting according to the water resilience strategy that we should take care also about the coastal developments and the coastal tourism. And sediments, and this was also in a way referred in the talk of Klaus, needs to be managed in a holistic approach. So this kind of holistic approaches not only for kind of environmental flows, but also for sediment management is very much needed. Because for the rivers, the important sediments are often managed in a certain way in the tributaries and in headwater regions. So meaning here we have to starting this kind of activities, bringing the sediments to the rivers that they can establish when the river has the certain width it is needed to establish the functional habitats which are required according to achieving the good ecological status in a long-term run, or even in some parts about the good ecological potential. But it's also a topic about resource material, right? Because in the dams and in the reservoirs, you will see then on the next slide schematically, you have this kind of accumulation of the transported sediments. And this means when you just have to take out the sediments, it might be a kind of resource perspective included into these materials, but not figured out to a well-developed stage, we have to say, in the European Union at the moment. So next slide, please. And now this is a little bit an animation on the next two slides, so we'll just say next, please, and Tasniam will go through next. Where the sediments are coming from. So we have, in principle, we have two hydropower plants. We have two hydropower plant concepts. The one is the storage power plants, and then we have the run-of-the-river hydropower plants. The storage plant, now this was too far, Tasnim. So
Okay, so
in the high-head regions, in principle, we have the storage power plants. So they're storing the incoming water from the catchment on a yearly basis, can be also on a monthly basis, right? But since this building of these storage power plants in the 1950s, 60s in Austria, like it was the case, they also were collecting these sediments coming from melting glaciers, coming from torrents, which are distributing the discharge, but also the sediments to these reservoirs. And then in the rivers downstream, we have the run-of-the-river power plants. But they're also getting sediments from partially regulated tributaries, which is indicated here, but also from the soil, washed out soil from agriculture, coming to these impounded sections and causing this kind of deposition. And the red dashed line is indicating something which we have in kind of response if you have this lack of sediment transport from upstream reaches, which is a river incision, like I was stating before. So when you have less sediment taking into the river system and probably an add-on higher transport capacity because the rivers have been narrowed, then you have this river incision, which might be at the Salzach River in some parts 7 centimeters per year. But this material is also then deposited in impounded sections of, for example, run-of-the-river hydropower plants. And this is an ongoing process of this kind of sediment delivery, because our Alps and many of the mountain ranges on the globe are still lifting up. So in alpine areas, we have 1.6 millimeters per year. So in the European Alps, Central Alps here in Switzerland, 1.6 millimeter per year. At the Balkan, we have 2 to 4 millimeters per year. In New Zealand, up to 10 millimeters per year. So these numbers are not very high when they are stated like I'm presenting here, but is meaning you have a continuous production of sediments due to the lift up and the erosional forces, fluid erosional forces, working against this kind of lift up. Mass wasting, ice cracking, all of this causes this kind of sediment production in a continuous way. And when we look at Europe, and when we compare north to the south, and when we look where we're in Central Europe, we see that there's a huge difference also, which must be considered in the operation of hydropower plants. It's for example, in Norway, it's not a big issue. There's 15 tons per square kilometer per year. What you have is kind of soil erosion, sediment production out of the catchment. But when you go to Albania, we have 20 to 40 tons per hectare per year. And it makes a huge difference. And there are cases in Albania, like Devol, for example, Devol hydropower plant, where the sedimentation rate is very huge, causing very huge troubles. And now the next slide, please. We're coming then to mitigation and costs. So this is also animated. It maybe stop here. Maybe stop here. Not going too fast because it's then we can follow. So it's an opportunity that you excavate these sediments, for example, by dredging. Dredging is is an opportunity to manage the sediments, but the costs for dredging and then the deposition, because it's by law in Austria and in many other European countries, dredged sediments are waste, and they have to be put at specific areas and placed there, meaning that these companies responsible for the dredging, they have costs of 20 to 30 euros per cubic meter. So these are numbers, they are almost 10 years old. So now we're talking about 30 to 40 euros per cubic meter. And that's the good condition, because then we talk about sediments which are not polluted. If you have polluted sediments, then the costs are going up to 125 euros per cubic meters and even higher. So meaning when you have to excavate sediments, especially the fines, and then you have polluted ones, it costs a lot for different companies. This is one concept, the dredging. The other one is flushing. And you see here a picture which is indicating really what's happening if you just open the bottom outlet. This kind of flushing concept is very inefficient due to the cohesive parts of these very fine sediments. So meaning you have only an erosion of a kind of small channel into the fine deposits, but it takes weeks and additional work with excavators to really have significant reduction of volume in this area if you can use the route of the open bottom outlet for transporting the fines out of the system, or as the system of the hydropower plant perspective. So meaning that we have here also 100,000, several hundred thousand euros up to million euros cost per flushing event for the individual companies. And then we have this kind of threshold criteria we have to consider. So next, please. So next, please, doesn't matter about the ecological and economic importance. So to get a permit, some of the hydropower companies, they have to pay in advance up to 100,000 euros that the local fishing associations give their kind of agreement that this kind of measure, opening the bottom outlet, for example, can be done. So we're not talking about compensation costs really, it's just that they are allowed to open, for example, the bottom outlet. And then later, it's an issue what was really the damage due to the fine sediments release, because they might be really high in concentration and also long in duration, causing what you see here on the pictures, these kind of impacts on fish. But then you have to pay in addition, right? So this is also something which is highly relevant for these kind of different hydropower companies. The next, please, and the last point about the costs I want to bring here are the socioeconomic costs and importance. So next, please. This is when, for example, for run-of-the-river hydropower plants, and next, please, Tasnim. Thanks. What you see here is on the x-axis, the timeline, on the y-axis, the tons deposited of fine material in one of the run-of-the-river hydropower plants in Austria at the Danube. It's the Aschach, the hydropower plant Aschach. And this blue line is indicating this continuous fill up with fine sediments until a certain equilibrium status is reached. So rivers are always trying to establish equilibrium status, same in reservoirs. And then there were two high flood events we had in 2002 and 2013. So meaning there were 100 years flood events, and they caused this kind of release of fine sediments, and the consequence was downstream. What you see in the pictures, deposits up to 2 meters, 3 meters fine sediment deposits in the floodplains, but also in the gardens of houses. And the people for sure were complaining, and what they did, that they have taken the hydropower companies to court, because these were high costs for cleaning all of this stuff and so on. So meaning this slide should indicate that at the present state, according to sediment management, there are huge costs also for the companies, and that sediment management is something which needs to be addressed. So next, please. And now we're coming to this contents of the white papers according to this. So how relevant is the catchment management approach for the different hydropower plant types? So we have to say that we should consider, like I was indicating on the slides before, different strategies for the particular type of hydropower plant. So it's a difference if it's a reservoir and a storage power plant, so meaning from this perspective, or a run of the river. With run of the river, you have the opportunity with the sluice gates, for example, that you are really sluicing the sediments in terms of high flows, which is not at the moment. You do not have the technical standards for the reservoirs. It's not expecting that you will have something similar from a dynamic perspective there included. Then this we have to say, without the proper tailor-made sediment management, its functionality in the long term may be compromised. So the predictions, especially for the Asian region, when without any countermeasures, you will have a huge reduction of the volume which should be used for electricity production, right? So it will be just replaced. And just to give you some numbers, at the present state, a lot of hydropower plants are built around the globe. But they cannot compensate all of these new power plants what is lost due to the sedimentation at the same time. So we have a kind of negative development at the moment. Even if you put more hydropower in place, without doing something against the sedimentation, we are losing net volume for electricity production. And there's one thing we have seen also over the years now, that sometimes the wrong hydropower concept is used, right? So you put dams like reservoirs I have indicated into large river systems. There are many examples around the globe, but what is the consequence? You cannot operate this dam anymore like it should be as a reservoir. You cannot handle the huge amount of flow, especially during floods, and you have this overspill. And this kind of spillways are part of the technical design, that you have an annual overspill of the higher flow rates, etc., etc. But you're also creating some fine sediment dynamics due to the overspill in the kind of impounded section, meaning that you have this sedimentation of fine sediments at the critical infrastructure like bottom outlets or even turbine intakes. So therefore, it's very important. It's a recommendation also from our side that we really just put the right power plant type in the boundary conditions, in the natural boundary conditions, which are given in the project area. So next slide, please. How sediment transporters for the hydropower plant can be measured. So for sure, there are a lot of techniques existing that can be measured directly or indirectly. So directly would be that you put some basket samplers on the river bottom, measure the core sediments, or you have some sampling devices also directly measuring the kind of incoming fine sediments. And these are numbers. These are numbers you can really use in your management. In the indirect kind of approach, you're measuring, for example, the turbidity only. So we had turbid water, but you have not the opportunity to say what was the concentration of fine sediments. So therefore, it's always important to combine these turbidity loggers with direct measurements. So you cannot do, especially the indirect ones, without having any validation. So this is very important to say. And then we have also in the hydropower business this kind of modern remote techniques we are developing at different universities around Europe, around the globe. For example, sorry, where the watercolor can be used as a proxy and also validated for fine sediment concentrations, for example. And yeah, each of them available resources for economics and with drones can be taken for drone measurements for assessment of the inlet channels in rivers, for example. But we have to say, and this was also stated in the white paper, that there are already existing information according to these different opportunities for sampling, like in this TIS guidance, and there's a reference given in our work to this kind of document where this is presented. So the next slide, please. Yeah, so what is today's common practice? So the Water Framework Directive is addressing the sediments only in a certain way. So we have no common approach about necessary strategies which are required to develop this program of measures. For example, in Austria, we have no risk maps for failing the good ecological status according to the sediment dynamics. So we have these risk maps for fish passes or not having fish passes. We have it for impoundments, we have it for hydropeaking, and we have it for residual flow. So here we have maps for whole Austria where it's reported to Brussels what is the risk and what then can be achieved with different measures to be better after a certain period. But we have not the same maps for sediments. And this is a very big shortcoming, not only in Austria, but also in other parts as well. Because as I said at the beginning, the sediments and the sediment dynamics is really the backbone of the river system. And also when you do planning of mitigation measures, so also the consulting companies, they're asking us at the university, do you have data about this river? Because officially not existing, they do not know if the river is transport or supply limited, which is a very important boundary for the whole planning process. So meaning this is also according to this, what is the practice at the moment. And then we have that sediment is a waste. I was referring to this. So it's, and it should be seen a little bit more as a potential resource, especially the fine ones. So the coarse ones we need in the river, about not having this incision and stabilizing, creating the functional habitats. But we have, in many cases, too much of the fines. And here it should be really targeted, and is also part of this kind of recirculating economy approach that we should look about how we can manage the fines in future. Yeah, so the flexible regulations, sediment is not considered as waste anymore, is something we're working on, and where there are activities, but it's not really established as a standard at the moment. So next slide, please. Yeah, what is the problem with today's common practice? So no common standards, I already said, and we have many cases, but we need more of these best practices and efficient and effective frameworks. So this placement of best practices from single countries showing to other countries in Europe and abroad beyond of this is very much needed, that we can learn from these best practices and think how we can implement the sediment management strategy in a better way in our project. So meaning that the economic, environmental, and societal constraints complicate the feasibility of sediment removal and transport in a certain way. And it's not only for the company itself, it's a kind of topic for the whole society, because dumping sediments out of a river, and especially when they're not polluted, in areas which we need maybe in future for other kind of activities, is something which really belongs to the whole society and not only the company itself. Yeah, and then as a potential resource, I was referring to this, we have some activities also on the European scale. It was addressed in the statement according to the Water Resilience Strategy from the European Economic and Social Affairs, that it should be more to talk about the potential resource. And next slide, please. So what are the future research and development needs? So just many of the points I already stressed and was talking about, but what was underlined here, that we should prepare the river systems to be targeted for fit for more sediments. So the sediment dynamics will increase in future due to the active management of the hydropower facilities. And there we have to trade off what the river needs and what is too much. And this too much should be used in a kind of way that is economically feasible, not only for the company, but for the whole society. So meaning, thus the increase in resilience according to the active sediment management has to be discussed hand in hand what is possible and requested from an operational perspective, but also including the flood safety, because in some of the run-of-the-river hydropower plants, this kind of deposition of fines are reducing the discharge capacity. Next slide, please. And this is also the final slide. So the key takeaways we just developed in the group, that the sediment management for hydropower is part and interlinked with the source-to-sea approach of the water resilience strategy. When you look in the water resilience strategy, you have the source-to-sea approach, but it's mainly for pollutants in the water resilience strategy. But it has definitely to be addressed also for the sediment management. When we were talking about these aspects also of transport to the coastline, it's something which is needed. Sustainable sediment management must consider both the economic and ecological needs and solutions by any stakeholder sediment management, including hydropower. The need to develop research and development on suspended particulate matter, suspended sediments, concentration accepted for aquatic ecosystems. So we are lacking in Europe about this data. We can refer to data of North America, but we do not have a lot of information according to this for our native species in Europe here. And sediment management for hydropower has to be technically optimized and aligned with natural processes, very important. Just natural processes needs to be supported because this is the kind of what also the aquatic organisms has adopted to, not only to certain habitat types, but also to the processes in a river system. And sediment management for hydropower must be addressed as a multi-stakeholder approach, including the polluter paying principle. Because the hydropower company, or what really formulated in a very simple way, it cannot be that hydropower companies or hydropower plants with their impounded sections are a kind of trash rack of the agriculture, right? So the pollutants and also the fine sediments and the polluted ones comes from a different system, but they're captured at the impounded sections, and at the moment, only the hydropower companies are responsible for the costs of managing this. Yeah, so I think this was the final slide. And yeah, I would say thanks for your attention and happy to take your questions.
Thank you,
Okay,
Christoph.
Raya.
Thank you so much. It was very interesting. I will go for the questions. I see one from Professor Adam. So he says sediment removal from reservoirs sometimes in many instances cause environmental and social negative impacts, and it's difficult to be regulated. Are you aware of specific guidelines or regulations for sediment removal from environmental and social consideration? Most of guidelines on removal methods are I don't understand this. But if you are aware of specific guidelines or regulations, that's the question.
And it's a very important topic and it's a very good question. So, I have no specific guideline in mind according to this very specific topic for sure. When you talk about sediment management and hydropower, there is this document from the World Bank, but it's more like for setting up hydropower project and the sediment management related to this. It has an implication also for smaller ones. In principle, it was designed for larger reservoirs or developed for larger reservoirs, but also for smaller ones because it's only when we talk about dam removal at the moment, right? And we have here also in Austria several cases where former small hydropower plants or weirs should be taken away. It's really a matter what the sediment deposition is behind these kind of small obstacles, right? So there have also this kind of sediment accumulation over decades, over hundreds of years in some of the cases of the old small weirs. And here is the organic part of these deposited sediments a crucial point. And this document from the World Bank, they're saying when you have obviously more than, I think, 15% or 10 or 15% of this organic material deposited, then it should be investigated in detail about pollutant aspects. And because when we're taking away these small weirs, right, you're just releasing all of the sediments downstream with the next more or less higher discharge event with the flood wave. So meaning that we also have to take care from a societal point of view, from an environmental point of view, which is an idea, which is nice, just to remove weirs and then create free-flowing conditions. But there is this kind of risk that you have this in this deposited sediments with a certain percentage of organic material, also some of these pollutants in there. But this is the guideline. Maybe it's well known, but from the World Bank about sediment management and hydropower, which can be applied in different cases, in different other cases as well.
Thank you, Christoph. I don't see any question, but I think we should be closing. So if there is any other question that has not been responded, you can always reach us out via email and we will connect you with the person that can reply to your question. In any case, I will give the floor to Tasnim and you can close the webinar.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it was a very interesting afternoon. And we see that hydropower and biodiversity are in partnerships. and hydropower plants can be part of free-flowing rivers. And this is very important. By aligning hydropower design and operations with environmental requirements, stakeholders can drive innovation in renewable energy while maintaining the integrity of ecosystems that sustain life for the future. With this webinar, we have the white papers available now on our website, and I kindly ask you to go to our website and download the white papers. And if you have any questions, just reach out to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Adam, you asked whether the PPTs we can share them. The recording will be available online, so you can check the slides there. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening, afternoon.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.